Hello and welcome to Inclusion in the Workplace, What Can FinTech Do? It's a real privilege to be here today. UK FinTech has raised 2.9 billion over the period of January to March, and that's across 117 deals. Now that just shows the scope that FinTech can have to make a difference when it's pointed at a particular topic. And I've already heard some fantastic panels this week on FinTech as it points at financial wellness, FinTech and sustainability, and today's topic, FinTech and inclusion. Now, for me, it's really easy to feel passionately about inclusion. It's something that has the ability to impact us all in the workplace, which is today's topic, but also in wider society. And for me, I just love being part of the conversation. I like moderating panels, being part of panels, and also just talking to my friends in the park. It's just absolutely fantastic. And why is that? Because there's always something to learn. There's always something that I can take away and build into my learning journey. And that's really what I want to get out for you. Something that you can take away and be sparked by, that you can take inspiration on, and something that you can build into your own learning development journey. Now, we've got some fantastic panelists today, so let's move straight into the intros. So my name's Katie Bentley. I'm going to be your moderator today. I am a director at Deloitte Ventures. We build new products and services that are focused on the cutting edge of market trends. We do that through an ecosystem of partners. We work with startups, alliances, established industry players to try and really get to the best answer, because usually the best answer involves many different perspectives. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to some of our panelists to do their intros. Alison, if I can come to you first.
Hi, yes. Yeah, I'm Ali Russell. I'm an acting head of department at the Financial Conduct Authority. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak on this panel this morning and for a fantastic series of events this week. It's a privilege to be included in a group of esteemed speakers, and I'm not sure I ever expected to be amongst a group with the Chancellor and royalty. So in my work, I'm head of department, one of the heads of department in innovation at the FCA, and our role, we do a huge amount of work to support innovation and FinTech. So we will do lots of exciting and important work with our sandboxes, with our firm support services to help firms to innovate, as well as using our data and analytics tools to support the work within the organisation as well.
Thank you. If I can come to Coley now, please.
Hi, I'm Coley Corte. I'm your resident US person, so I'm up very early this morning. So I'm the head of business transformation at AllianceBernstein, and I really look at how we can modernize our offer, which includes, like Katie was talking about, partnering with fintechs and others to create a ecosystem where we can innovate and modernize, are really focused around distribution. So using digital for scale, data for precision, and personalization, and how we expand into adjacencies that are relevant to our customers. I'm also the head of our Diversity Champions Council. I'm the co-chair for the Americas and our executive sponsor globally, and sit on the DCC for the company as well. And diversity and inclusion are critical to me, and I'm really excited for this conversation.
Thank you, Coley. Lewis, if I could come to you next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lewis Liu, co-founder and CEO of Eigen Technologies. We are a no-code document AI platform for financial services. We work with over 40% of the world's GSIB banks, asset managers, hedge funds, and insurance companies, also backed by Goldman Sachs and ING. And we help financial institutions transform their documents, loan documents, derivatives contracts, CLO prospectuses, bond docs, into structured usable data to mitigate risk and make better decisions. As an sort of Asian American, for us, diversity has always been a really sort of important, but we also call it sort of a very normal concept for Eigen. We like here at Eigen to say diversity, when done well, is normal. It just is. And that's something we all try to strive for.
I love that. Thank you very much, Lewis. And finally, I've got Victoria. But before I do her introduction, I'd just like to say congratulations, Victoria. We got notification last week that Victoria won a Distinguished Payment Professional Award from the Women in Payments award body. So congratulations from us all, Victoria.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much, Katie. And thanks for inviting me to this panel. It's absolutely fantastic that diversity and inclusion is on the agenda for FinTech Week. And I mean, maybe next year we can be first day rather than fifth day. Let's see. So I'm Victoria Cleland. I'm the Executive Director for Banking, Payments and Innovation at the Bank of England. One of the key things my team does is to run the real-time gross settlement system, so the key UK payment system where £700 billion is going across it every working day. We're in the process of a programme to renew this system where resilience is absolutely key, but we're really doing a big push on innovation as well, thinking about what new players might want to be using the system, how we can increase access, promote innovation, promote competition. Also my area, I've got the Bank of England's FinTech Hub, which working very closely with some people on this panel in Innovate Finance and looking at issues from AI to RegTech. So really exciting area there. And I'm actually also the executive sponsor of the Bank of England's Disability Network. So it's really good to be here talking about the sort of diversity and inclusion agenda. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, let's kick off with an opening question around what diversity and inclusion means to you. I always find this is a nice way to start the conversation because for me, inclusion has changed so much in what it means from when I started work to where we are now. So I'm going to come now to Alison and Victoria if I can. Alison, are you okay to go first?
Yeah. So for me, actually, Lewis, I've stolen your words because I've written down here in my notes that for me, it's really ultimately it should just be normal. It shouldn't matter who you are, what your background is. You're just able to be yourself, and it makes no difference. And for me, in terms of two important things, in terms of how we get there, are two quite simple things. It's about being kind to one another and never judging a book by its cover. I have brittle bones and I'm a wheelchair user. I'm petite, only about 4 foot tall, and if we had the joy of being physically present with each other, I wouldn't be one of those people whose appearance blends in. And growing up in the 1980s, much of society considered me, like others with protected characteristics, incapable, unintelligent, unlikely to achieve, and someone to be pitied. But I was extraordinarily lucky that my family and I never shared any of those views. My parents didn't wrap me up in cotton wool. They pushed me out into the world. And while it wasn't always easy, I thrived. I left home at 18 to go to university, and I haven't looked back since. And in the workplace, it's through creating networks of people who are kind, see the opportunity and skills that I bring, and don't judge me for my dust jacket, who have helped me to thrive.
Thank you. That's really meaningful. And I actually have a daughter who's got a disability myself. So actually, thank you for sharing how inspiring your parents have been in that journey. That's been a good plus point for me to hear that. Victoria, may I come to you now?
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's really important that we're discussing diversity and inclusion together. I think to me, diversity is really making sure you get the right mix of people, but inclusion is making sure that they can bring their whole selves to work and they can not just survive, but they can thrive, which is much more satisfying for them, but much better for business as well. And I mean, just in terms of diversity, I think it is really important that we take a diverse view to diversity. There has been an enormous focus on sort of getting more women into FinTech and other things, which is super important. And more recently, there's been more focus on BAME, but it is really important to think about some of those other protected characteristics, disability, think about LGBT as well, but also going that step further, what about social diversity, cognitive diversity? So as I say, let's put the diversity into diversity and think really broadly. And why is it important? I think partly it's the right thing to do. There is lots of great talent out there. We should really be nurturing it, allowing people to do their best. I think Ali's background story that she shared with us is fantastic. But actually, it can be good for business too. I mean, there's lots of research that says that wider views, diverse thinking can lead to much better challenges, creative thinking, and avoiding groupthink. And it's also trying to think, what are you doing as an organisation? So for the Bank of England, diversity and inclusion is one of our top strategic priorities. And in particular, we think that as a central bank serving the whole of the UK, that we should be as diverse ourselves as the public that we're there to serve. But I think there's some lessons there for fintech more broadly as well, you've got an enormous potential customer base out there. You really need to understand all of those. And if you've got a broader sense of people involved and on board, you're probably going to hit that more. I mean, I was looking at stats. I'm afraid most of them are more in relation to gender than other types of diversity. But I think only 30% of staff in fintech are women, and some work looking at sort of the founders of companies who are selected for the FinTech 50, just 5% of those are women. So there is a big gap there, which hopefully there'll be some ideas we can talk about on this session that will help to start increasing those numbers.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, I really agree, Victoria, and I think it's, it's important, because as well as just having, every human should be able to thrive, it's important for FinTech and us as a regulator, because we need to reflect the society we serve. And our work has the potential to touch almost every UK resident's daily life and the lives of millions who rely on UK markets. And we operate in increasingly complex environments, and we need those diverse teams capable of dealing with the challenges we face and the judgments we need to make. So I absolutely agree, Victoria, with your comments.
Lewis, I can see that you're nodding. Can I bring you in?
Sure, absolutely. I think I really love the point Ali made about kindness. I think that oftentimes we live in a world where we are so caught up in getting to the next step, getting to the next milestone, that we are all humans. And I think the COVID pandemic has shown how important that is. And the second point I really sort of like, I really like hearing is Victoria's point about we need to have a diverse thinking about diversity. I think that there are many different dimensions of diversity and inclusion that we really do need to make sure that we cover as many bases as possible, because frankly, we want to be able to bring, we are, one of the beautiful things about human nature is that we are infinitely variable. And I think that is something that I think we sometimes lose track of. We really need to be very diverse in our thinking and how we think about diversity as well. I really like that point, Victoria.
Yeah, and I think it's got such a big impact, that difference of opinion as to how we build our businesses of the future. And Coley, I know you've got a strong role around transformation, so it'd be interesting to get your views on how sort of inclusion and diversity has impacted your development in your area.
Yeah, so I mean, I think everything that everyone has said is like spot on, right? I've always talked about, sometimes it's actually harder to have a really diverse team, but that really diverse and inclusive thinking, that struggle, actually, that friction is real. We need to deal with it, and we get to a better outcome that does reflect the audiences that we need to serve much better, right? So I love what Lewis said about this infinite combinations, but I've led teams where, look, it would be really easy if I had a team of 12 coleys, right? It'd be really super easy. We would all think we were smart. We'd get decisions quickly. We'd get stuff done, and it wouldn't resonate with anyone, right? Because while we would have all agreed, we would have missed what the larger group was thinking. So I think both the diversity of background, thought, perspective, right? All of those combinations of different things we can bring both to the workplace and our personal lives, as well as creating the atmosphere where they can thrive. And I think that was something really important that Victoria, I think, really called out. And I spent a lot of time on the inclusion side, right? We say diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And if we don't create the inclusive environment, the diversity won't thrive, right? It won't even stick. So I think it's both sides, and I think that is how we're going to modernize, is that we need to understand all these different perspectives. We need to bring them to the party, so to speak, or to the table. We need to have that open dialogue, and then we need to get to the best outcomes. And I think we all can learn so much in that process, which, Katie, I think is where you started too.
Fantastic. And just thinking about diversity of perspectives, I'd encourage all of our audience to drop any questions that they had or any comments that they had into the Q&A function. We want this to be really interactive. So please do, as those thoughts occur to you, do drop them in, and we'll try and get to as many of your questions as we can. So I'd like to turn now to the technology aspect of FinTech. So there's so many opportunities in data and disruptive technologies to improve accessibility and improve inclusion. And I'd love from some of the panel around either examples they've seen of this working or where they think some of the opportunities are. So Lewis, if I could come to you.
Of course, and we are an AI company, right? And so there's a lot of talk and a lot of attention focused on AI ethics, and how AI makes decisions, and how can you make those decisions transparent. And just a really good example, really concrete example of a issue that we've been asked. So we process mortgages, a lot of mortgage documents and a lot of refinancing documents for banks. And what's super interesting is that we've looked for scenarios in which, when the machine is pulling out certain clauses or making certain decisions out of these documents, it's learning from previous documents, right, that it's seen before. And obviously sometimes there will be sort of skews in very specific sort of demographic implications in terms of decisions or metrics. And of course, the machine will learn that based on its training data, right? So one of the things that we've done to just design our AI is to make sure that every decision that's made is extremely transparent in terms of who trained the machine, how was the machine trained, and how those decisions are made. And I think sometimes some of the deep learning techniques in AI, I think, really complicate this matter, and we really try to get ahead of it in the design of our product. And the second piece around using AI to improve technology, or technology to improve sort of diversity, is of course ESG. It's a really big concept today in the world of investing. And actually, one of the things that we have been really focused on is helping our sort of buy-side clients really pull out information around ESG metrics. One of the most notable examples from diversity inclusion is pulling out, of course, sort of gender ratios and other types of diversity metrics within the bond prospectuses or annual reports of companies that are sort of buy-side clients are looking for. And so those are just two real explicit examples, one risk and one opportunity where we think AI can help sort of move forward this agenda.
I think you're right. And actually, as a corporate, we're spending a lot of time working out how we categorize the ethical value of our portfolio. But always the challenge is, how are you categorizing that versus other people if you're trying to create a comparator group across different companies, for example? So it's great that you're thinking about it and that some of your customers are as well. Ali, I imagine that's something that FCA are looking at as well in terms of how data is being used and in what format.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of work going on at the FCA, thinking about data, thinking about how we use data, how firms use data, what various regulators' involvement might be in that. And that's really through a lot of that work's being conducted through the AI public-private forum being led with the Bank of England. So there we're gathering together different regulators, industry, academia, to start to have those debates, because as Lewis has pointed out, there's huge benefit and there's also risks to weigh up too. So I think there's going to be a lot of exciting things coming out in the next few years in terms of how we progress in using some of these technologies.
Very interesting. And Victoria, has the Bank of England also got quite a bit of thinking around this?
Yeah, and as Ali said, I mean, there's some joint work that we're doing with the FCA and the AI PPF, which is really interesting. We're also looking, for example, at the PRA rulebook and how to make that far more interactive, use technology there. But also, I think it's really interesting to think about what data can we use to help us improve the diversity of the workforce and things as well. So FinTech's got some really clever work it can do, but are we actually thinking about using that to increase diversity amongst staff? So I mean, one of the things we do in the Bank of England is there's a piece of software that can look at job descriptions and try and make sure that they've got more gender neutral language in them, because it can be and apparently there'll be certain words that would put different types of people off the job. So that is one way that sort of technology is being used. But I think more broadly, getting more data is incredibly important about sort of our staff and employees, and that will really help us to understand what the issues are, what the starting point is. And it's not enough to just think, oh, well, how many people of different characteristics have we recruited? You need to dig deeper. You need to think, well, how many are we retaining? And even on the recruitment, it's not just how many do you get through the door, but actually how many applied, what proportions got through to the next stage and the next stage, to try and understand where you might be finding that unconscious bias. So using data in this way could be really helpful. So don't just use your WYSI data to solve financial problems, really help it to solve diversity of staff as well.
I think that's a great point. And just for those of you in the audience who are perhaps not that comfortable with data, there's some really good books out there that can help you work out how you can interrogate it. For me, there's Invisible Women. There's also a book called Calling Bull, The Art of Skepticism in a Data-Driven World. And they're both really illustrative as to how you can interrogate data in a different way. Coley, I saw you nodding during Victoria's comments there.
Yeah, I was going to add just a couple of points. I thought what Victoria was saying was so spot on, and it's really interesting as a research-driven firm, right? Our heritage was research. Data is very natural to us. So interrogating that data, looking at that data, the data that's available is amazing. And I think it's bringing the pieces together, the data and what does it mean, right? What's the insight? What do we need to do? And how do we create the right atmosphere? But we're doing a lot of the things that Victoria talked about, including looking at the job descriptions to make sure they're inclusive. We also test and learn, right? We don't know everything that we're going to do is going to work. So we've tried blind resumes where we've stripped out details from the resume that may create a level of unconscious bias. And then we do really focus on a diverse slate as well as a diverse slate of candidates and a diverse slate of interviewers so that we can do more. So we've looked at going to more skills-based interviewing so that you can have interviewers from different areas of the company and get, again, more of that diverse perspective on a candidate rather than just feeling like it has to sit within the line so that they get a full view of the firm as well.
That's really interesting. And actually, a number of you now have referred to the importance of having a diverse set of views when you're creating products or whether you're thinking about transformation. I'd be interested to hear if you've got any examples of how you've done this well yourselves or how you've seen companies do this well, because it is difficult to encourage people with different backgrounds or different perspectives sometimes to come forward. Coley, I can see you nodding.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we've done a couple of things, and again, none of this is perfect, right? So we're still a work in progress, but we do a lot of agile forums where we can do rapid prototyping and sprint sessions where we can bring different people in the room. Today's room is an electronic room, but we can bring them into the Zoom room, so to speak, and have them participate. And so, for example, we're launching a tool on May 3rd called the Digital Coach. And the Digital Coach is a tool to help advisors ultimately access AB, but also help them to understand themselves better. It's based on behavioral finance, so they can understand themselves better and understand their development needs and where we can help them. And in building it, we did everything from including the sales and marketing teams in the development to bringing users in, right, and having them experience the tool and give feedback where it was valuable, where it wasn't, where the language worked for them, where it didn't make sense, right? So if you're digitizing face-to-face experience, you have to really think about everything there and how it resonates with the audience who's going to be interacting with it. And so those are some of the ways we've gotten viewpoints that are past ours, right? It's not just us sitting in a room sort of confirming our hypotheses, but really bringing others in, seeing how they're both in theory engaging with the tool or they'd like to, and then actually watching them engage with it and seeing where things go wrong or where it doesn't work to meet their needs.
I think that's really interesting around how different people use things. Definitely over the last year, I've seen a lot more emphasis on making sure that we've got good diversity when we think about our user journeys, in the early stage of building, early stage of prototyping. Lewis, is that something that you thought about when you were developing your product?
Yeah, I mean, when we think about our product, our end users are the traders or the portfolio managers or the analysts that use it. So that we're a B2B software, right? So I think from that perspective, I think that's pretty standardized. But the next level is we do think about financial access, right? If we think about diversity, especially as a FinTech forum, it's not just, diversity around recruitment and our own employees is really important. But also, living in the world of finance, we play an extremely important role in society, and making finance accessible to a diverse group of users of finance and users of capital is equally as important. So back to sort of the mortgage example I've given, right? What that was really about is making sure that the models we train do not bias in any way decisions that come out of the analysis of the documentation, and sort of bias from a sort of demographic perspective. Another sort of example of sort of when I think about diversity of access and how a product sort of thinks about that. is we're working with a charity that's working with a group of UK venture capital firms right now, when we're actually pulling out all of the data from the annual returns of startups and basically looking at, are there trends around demographics versus funding versus valuation? I'm sure there are. We'll release the data shortly, and trying to basically understand, are certain groups of people being under sort of scoped from access to capital and access to entrepreneurship. So I think as a financial community, it's extremely important for us to consider those things, because ultimately we do allocate the capital, right? And capital ultimately plays into wealth distribution, ultimately plays into giving people opportunities. I think we need to think about our employees, but also think about the distribution of the capital as well.
Very interesting point, actually. And I think it's really fascinating that you're working with charities to find that information as well. I'd be interested to hear from potentially Victoria and Ali as well around that kind of broader collaboration with different types of communities, different types of partnerships to get to the right answer. How have you seen that benefiting FinTech?
Yeah, I'm happy to start with that. And actually, in the real-time growth settlement renewal program, which I mentioned, working with industry and a wide range of industry has been incredibly important. So we're renewing the system, but actually we need to think back, who is going to be using that system, what are their requirements. We work very closely with industry in terms of the blueprint that set the vision, and now we're going back regularly to check, okay, time is moving on, is this still what you want? But one of the things we were very conscious on wasn't just to go to the big players, we want to go to the big ones and the small ones, but not just to go to the incumbents and those who are there now, but trying to think who might want to be using this system in a few years' time. So actually getting some ideas more from fintechs, from some of the challenger banks and things, what would they want and what would attract potential players to that. And so one example, although we've decided not to use distributed ledger technology for the core settlement engine, we've done some work to make sure that the system is compatible with DLT if someone wanting to connect uses it. So I think it's really important to get that diverse range of views. And actually earlier this week, Andrew Bailey was sort of launching the Meeting Various People initiative, which is really thinking about the bank's approach to financial market intelligence, going out and gathering that. And again, making sure we're listening to a broad range of firms and to a broad range of people within that, and that you don't just think, oh, I've spoken to two CEOs of the biggest banks, I know everything. So really trying to push that forward. So I think understanding what users want, what staff want, and that it's really move away from groupthink, get lots of different ideas.
Love that. And Alison, is that something that you've got a sandbox, haven't you, as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that's a really good point in terms of the sandbox. So we, in our most recent cohort, in cohort 7, we started to ask them questions about diversity and inclusion and how the firms themselves who were applying for our support were approaching diversity and inclusion, as well as considering the propositions and how might they help to serve underserved communities, for example. So we're looking to build upon that a lot more, so we can think about as we move along and we turn to an always on sandbox, how that forms part of our application process and how we can get to a place where we're making sure that we're supporting diverse firms and diverse propositions. And we also use our convening powers. So last month we had our female economic empowerment tech sprint. So that's bringing together all sorts of a range of different organisations, backgrounds, and to think about some societal issues. And so that there we can really draw on the huge range of experience, thought, and ideas to come up with a really wide range of propositions to support some of the issues that we need to resolve.
I think that's really interesting that you refer to that as kind of becoming more prevalent in the nature of your conversations, definitely now when we look at who we partner with and what products we're building, conversations with our partners around what's their position on inclusivity and diversity, what are their values, are becoming much more common to make sure that actually our partnership is going to work, which I don't think I'd seen in the same way maybe 5 years ago. And I'd be interested, Lewis, I can see you nodding your head. Is that something that you're seeing when you're talking to potential partners or relationships?
Absolutely. So when we do RFPs, for example, even 2-3 years ago, there was nothing about makeup or diversity metrics as an organization. And actually now almost every single RFP that we enter for a large bank or insurer, they actually have very specific questions that they ask about us as a vendor in terms of what our both our sort of D&I metrics are, as well as broader ESG metrics. So I think that what we're starting to see is a growing trend of not just ourselves internally looking at what our metrics are and how well we're doing against it's sort of a long journey, right? But I think that there's also a very important external factor that you're being judged for as well, which, by the way, I think is a really good thing, because I think it holds we as an organization need to be held externally accountable for these things.
Very interesting. Just want to encourage everyone to submit some questions. I don't know whether it's my connection, but I'm not seeing any questions if they are being submitted. But hopefully either somebody else in the panel or the producers can help me out with that. So yeah, just continuing with the questions that we've got while we look at trying to access those questions for you. I think the biggest thing for me when I think about diversity and inclusion is potentially the expectations of the future generations. I was listening to a panel the other day, and they were talking about how the youth of today, which I really don't like the phrase of, expect things done a certain way. They expect accessibility, they expect diversity, they expect inclusion, and they really expect these things to be part and parcel of the products that they receive. I'd be interested to understand if any of the panel have started to think about or projecting forward to what the future of the business or the future of FinTech might look like when we think about diversity and inclusion. Coley, can I come to you if you're thinking about it from your perspective?
Sure. I mean, I think, we heard a lot about authenticity, right? I do see a lot more of allowing people to bring their authentic selves to work, right? And I don't mean allow, but really that it's like much more acceptable. I mean, much earlier in my career, right, there's a lot of pressure, and even on me, right, I'm not that diverse, but women in financial services are somewhat diverse, and straighten your hair or wear my hair back, right? And I think today, right, people are much more bringing their authentic, not just their style and their appearance, but also their perspective and ways they can contribute to the conversation. And we need to be attuned to those different things, right? So making sure the quiet person in the room gets a voice, right? Finding ways and so I see that all changing in the fabric, right? I think there's so much change going on now due to COVID, and in many ways, everyone being remote has been inclusive, right? Because it used to be sometimes you'd have a lot of people in the room and some people who were in a different office or location, and they'd be trying to chime in, and it would always be harder. And so you'd have like an office-based culture or a headquarters-based culture that was harder to break down. And the past year has forced everyone's in the same place. Everyone's a box on the screen, right? And I want to make sure that we bring that back as we return to the office. And how do we bring what we've learned over the past year, the changing preferences, I wouldn't just say of youth, but I think of like how people are living their lives, right? There are lasting things that are changing because of COVID, but also lasting things that are changing just more broadly. And I think that authenticity and finding space for everyone is really, really critical. And finding the ways that work for them, both customers, employees, et cetera, partners, throughout the ecosystem.
I think that's a great point. And we were talking earlier about an example of a party, I think it was Victoria, that you'd run, and how previously we might have done an in-person party. We might have had the loudest person in the room that was going to be comparing and hosting. And now we look for individuals who have got different skills, perhaps running a quiz, perhaps writing a song. And those individuals wouldn't have had the chance to shine or take that forward. But I see that as a real opportunity. Victoria, I don't know whether you've got any other examples like that.
Yeah, and I think that the point about authenticity is absolutely key. But to get that authenticity to come around, I think one of the things we really need to do is to try and help understanding of where different perspectives are coming from, and not always being sort of afraid to ask some questions. So we've been running some great sort of leadership workshops in the Bank of England. So we've had a leadership workshop around inclusive cultures, which partly got to your point, Kate, in terms of we've got a really wide range of staff now, different generations and things with different expectations. Are we adapting our leadership style enough to meet that? We've been having let's talk about race workshops, so really trying to, again, understand what are the issues, understand what questions one should and shouldn't ask. And actually, I think what's been most powerful in some of this is where we're looking to staff to share their stories, because it's very easy to just sort of overgeneralize and say you need to think seriously about mental health and make sure your teams are right. But what we've actually had is a couple of really powerful films called This Is Me, one by the Mental Health Network, one by the Disability Network, with staff coming forward. And it can be a brave thing to do, but it's great they have, and just explained some of the issues they've been sort of grappling with either mental health or disability, what it means, what it feels like. And now we're trying to take it that step further and put out some more management guidance in terms of how can managers work with people with sort of different requirements and things, and just to understand that. So I think this, be authentic, bring yourself to work, but the flip side is you also need to understand what people are like when they're being authentic and adapt to that. So I think we're going to have to be much more flexible. We need to spend much more time on sort of the staff leadership side and development.
Chloe, I can see you nodding.
Yeah, I just thought that was a great point, right? I talked a lot about the one side of it, which is the authenticity, and then I think it is the fine tuning, right? So that you understand what that is, and you can create the atmosphere and the place where that can thrive.
And I think that's where the networks are so hugely important. You referenced your disability network there, Victoria, but I think all networks where you can get some of the things through is so important. We've got a question here. Do you see topics or matters of inclusion in the workplace being regarded and increasingly considered by acquirers and investors in M&A scenarios as part of a deal? Chloe or Lewis, either one. I think I can see you both raring to go.
Yeah, I'll take it quickly and then I'll pass it to Lewis. But I think totally. I mean, I think both in investors that want to work with us, and like institutional investors are really looking at that. It's also an investment decision, right? When we're looking at companies, and certainly from an M&A perspective, right? Culture's always been a factor, and I think now we can define culture much more into the type of atmosphere we want to build, to all the things that Victoria and I just touched on in terms of authenticity, inclusion, right? And I think there's data to support it, right? So you can use that data in those transactions too.
Thank you, Lewis.
And just from perspective, I mean, we as a service, we offer our investment buy side customers the analysis of ESG data through their documentation. So actually, it's actually a product that we even offer, and that's really taken off. But secondly, as a private company, we're a venture-backed company, we're also seeing that every due diligence questionnaire we need to fill out when we go out to do a funding round, especially the last funding round, we had to, sort of fill out like percentage of LGBTQ, percentage of sort of different races, different gender sort of ratios across different business lines and different functional areas of the executive team and our board. And we happen to be really proud of the fact that we have an extremely diverse board for a FinTech AI company, as well as an executive team. So we're really proud of that. But I think that a part of that, I think, comes from the fact that I think I said in the beginning, we see diversity and inclusion as just normal practice. Like it's almost sort of, I don't want to say it's boring, but it's just so much part of who we are that it doesn't even register anymore. And I think I think that's the kind of culture that we really want to embrace, which is everyone can just be themselves and just get down to business. And I think that's really where we should all drive towards.
I love that. And that's a great point to end on, I think. So thank you very much to all the panelists and the audience that have joined us here today. It's been a really fascinating conversation, and I've really appreciated the examples that you've all shared. It's been great to get to know you as well. And I hope that the audience have had an enjoyable 40 minutes and have got those learnings to take away. Thank you so much to everyone that's joined us, and have a lovely Friday.
Thank you.